We're here today with the Tillamook County Pioneer, and this is our ongoing podcast series, Get to Know Your Local Nonprofit. I'm here today with Nancy and Anna, and I'm going to tell you the name of the organization. And Nancy, please correct me if I stumble, because it's the North Coast Citizens for Watershed Protection, or is
It's North Coast Communities for Watershed Protection.
Communities. Perfect. Before I tell you anything about the organization, I'm going to let Nancy and Anna introduce themselves.
My name is Nancy Webster, and I got involved with a group of other people concerned about our drinking watershed, Jetty Creek, about 13 years ago. And we started then as Rockaway Beach Citizens for Watershed Protection. And it soon became apparent that drinking water issues related to logging and spraying within drinking water sources were happening up and down the North Coast. And so we evolved with people joining us from Astoria to Lincoln City.
And I'm Anna Kaufman. I'm a recent graduate of Vassar College in Environmental Studies, and I've been working with NCCWP since the spring of last year. I'm their Astoria coordinator, so I've been helping them with work in Clatsop County.
Wonderful. So I'm really familiar with the organization. I am not keeping as close of track of what is going on in Jetty Creek as I would like to. I imagine there are other people who might not even know what some of the issues are. So at the broad 50,000 foot level, what does your organization do, and what kinds of advocacy work do you have coming up?
So when we first started about 13 years ago, we became alarmed that we were receiving in our drinking water notices that we were above the federal standards for trihalomethanes, which occurs when you have a lot of turbidity in the water and you're adding chlorine. And the byproduct is trihalomethanes, acidic acids, which are listed as carcinogenic. And communities, when they do spray near us, we could smell it. And so people became concerned, and we started looking at how do we reached out to local officials, reached out to the governor's office, to the agencies, and we became more and more working as advocates. Our goal has been to bring this issue to attention, to bring about change. And we evolved with Mary Woods who's the environmental law professor at University of Oregon, that this is the public right to clean air and water. And so we become advocates standing for, we all deserve safe and drinkable water and safe air to breathe.
It's a really important goal and mission. It took me a long time to really understand what turbidity is and how dynamic it is in the watershed. So I imagine people without formal training probably really don't understand it all. And that's definitely not to cast judgment on anyone. It's just a very complicated issue that involves temperature and sunlight and timing and a whole host of other factors. I'm going to ask you something that's, I know, really difficult, but can you summarize why it's important and how dangerous these chemicals are, and some of those issues around how it impacts human health?
So I'll summarize. When you have our watershed, well, to use Jetty Creek as an example, is about 1,200 acres, really steep slopes. They're listed on the Slido maps of Oregon, the geology maps, as highly likely to slide and active slides. And so you have trees on these steep slopes. Trees hold the soil, store the water. And then when you clear cut all these trees, then the slope, there's nothing to hold the slopes. the dirt, the runoff. And so that's what creates turbidity. So the rains come and all of this dirt washes down and ends up in the treatment plant, and then the communities, had to spend all this money to build a new treatment plant. But the byproduct of then adding all this chlorine is a chemical that can affect, is listed as carcinogenic, and so the communities are also exposed to these pesticide spraying, and there's very little testing. The city only has to test once every 3 years on the pesticides that are being sprayed. That's just nothing. And so there's people in the communities are concerned about their exposure. Is this affecting health? We would like epidemiology studies to see how much are people being exposed. And we talked to Deke Gunderson, PhD toxicologist. He said, you have a reason to be concerned.
And for listeners who are not familiar with some of the health concerns within the community, I remember hearing, and this data is really hard to get, epidemiological data is not common, especially in rural areas, especially when you connect it to industry and health impacts. So we don't have a data set to conclusively point to increased rates of cancer. There are some studies that show around the mill, so that some of the heavy metals that used to be used were impacting, and they noticed a generational change within a small group of people within that area, but that's about it. Colloquially, I personally have heard of exceptionally high rates of cancer. And obviously there's overlap because it is a retirement community. People do come to the area to heal. So it could, there could be some correlations, not causation. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that all of the things that you just mentioned, especially some of the industrial chemicals that they used to suppress weeds and keep pests down on the new growth, are extremely dangerous. And having lived next to a clear cut, both my male neighbors on both sides had prostate cancer, one of whom died of it. And another person had prostate cancer in the same location. So to me, and I've had health issues that may have just been coincidental, but I drank well water for many years, and they did spray while I was drinking that water. So, if that has an impact on the human body is not something I'm legally allowed to say. So I won't make that claim or accusation because I don't want to be sued. But please do your own research, and hopefully we can get some conclusive data. But it seems like you're so much more than just watershed health from a singular perspective. So what are some of the other things that you guys are doing to help protect the communities within this North Coast area and the watersheds that provide drinking water?
Anna?
Well, I think it's such a huge issue because it is about all of these different facets of life and the economy and politics and biology. And I think it's at its core, it's about protecting people because we really don't know. We are kind of participating in our own experiment, really, because we're changing the environment rapidly with the amount of clear cutting we're doing here, not just in Oregon, but up into Canada. We have friends in Peachland who are experiencing very similar things with their own watershed, the Peachland watershed. And they're having huge issues with their water quality and quantity. So I think what we're trying to do really is make these connections between the things we're doing and potential consequences that we need to be looking at, whether it's consequences of health with endocrine disruptors and carcinogens, constantly putting that into our environment, or whether it's looking at climate change, which is a huge issue that we're facing, and that's going to expedite as years go on. So I think we're just trying to really make connections and educate people about, things they should be thinking about for themselves, for their families, for future generations.
Really well said. Nancy, you mentioned a petition, Nancy or Anna. What's that petition about?
So the petition states we want no more logging or pesticide spraying within our drinking water sources, no matter the ownership. And we're talking about from spring boxes to municipalities. And in the 13 years, we've met with the legislature numerous times. We've gone to the agencies, and we feel that if we need to take this issue to the people and bring it to their attention. And there were studies before COVID that showed that even people within the industry, the workers don't like the pesticides either. And doing this petition this last summer at farmers markets and different events, I was heartened to see that people from all walks of life, including people working in the mills, came up and signed our petition. And one man who had lives all his life up the Tillamook is really concerned about the clear cuts affecting fish and also the effects of the spray. One man had been a mill worker locally. He had retired. He was alarmed at all the spraying happening near him. Another fishermen have talked about consequences of the fish and the sprays, and they're also really concerned about the deforestation and how that is affecting with all the turbidity the fish runs. And there's links there. Leading science is now talking about how deforestation is really mimicking global climate change, and so climate disruption. And I think you walk into a clear cut, it's hot in a clear cut, there's no shade, and that just then it heats up the water. It's bad for the fish and it's bad for the people.
It's extremely succinct, and that's essentially the problem in a nutshell. How receptive has industry been to some of the concerns that you have been raising?
So we have met with industry, and we had a meeting at St. Mary's by the Sea Church, and we're always polite. But the frustrating, and the man who was the regional manager for what was, it was Pope and Talbot, and then it was Olympic Resource Management. The name changed, but they said, well, our first priority is the stockholders, which is an honest response. And with them, we got them to hold off on logging one little section. But in reality, they have their own way of looking at the forest, which isn't, to me, according to current science. They have their own science. And so there's real denial that this logging is affecting our drinking water. And but I think luckily we've always been polite, to each other, but it's been frustrating. And we were for a while meeting as a group with one of the Greenwoods, but we're not equal players at the table. And I really feel that when we're meeting, we need our own legal teams and support, etc.
So, how does one get involved in your organization? Are there regular meetings? Do you meet in person or online? I imagine most of this is on your website. This is a great time to plug it, and I'll put some links somewhere, probably in the description.
So we're happy that people to get involved, and you can go to our website and sign up. And we do meet. We were with the COVID, we were more doing Zoom meetings, and we're with St. Mary's by the Sea, we're starting again. We had an opening in Astoria. Anna could mention it. That was a opening the Astoria chapter in person. And so I'm still a little afraid of COVID, but so we're having hybrid meetings coming up in the future. And there's things for just if someone's being on our mailing list makes me happy, but there's also things to do, from putting up flyers to being involved in writing press releases, or to, presenting our petition to the legislature. There's
Finding the petition. Yes.
there's multiple ways of being involved, and also, like, too, if you're an expert in any field, we could use your help too, or if you just want to greet people at one of our whatever your interest is, we would be happy to get involved, have you get involved. And also, it's a great learning chance. We have prided ourselves in bringing speakers that will speak to what actually is happening, truth to power. These are people that are independent of making money from industry.
Yeah, your speaker series is amazing. Why don't you share some of your upcoming guests? That might entice people to go to your website and sign up for that.
Anna?
Yeah, so we have on February 3rd at 2 p.m. at St. Mary's by the Sea, we're going to have a community meeting. Welcome, everyone is welcome. So, but it's mostly for Rockaway Beach citizens to come together to discuss the future of their watershed, the Jetty Creek watershed, and what's going to happen with it, with potential changes in ownership coming up. And they will have a chance to hear Coast Range Association Director Chuck Willer speak about different land management options, community cooperative land management, and then we'll open it up to a discussion. City council members will be there, we hope.
Great. Hopefully.
So,
yeah.
yeah. So it's really for everyone, and so there are great opportunities like that that you can have, and you can learn more and see some of our past events and webinars on our website, healthywatershed.org. We just had Herb Hammond, who is a pretty esteemed forester and forest ecologist, come and talk to us, and hopefully this year we're looking into some other people like Teresa Ryan, who works with Suzanne Simard on the Mother Tree Project. So really exciting people like that.
That sounds interesting. Is that about old growth or?
Yeah, old growth and really the mycorrhizal networks and kind of connectivity that happens in mature forests that you don't really have in plantation forests.
That is a very interesting topic. I definitely noticed a difference in my own land in the diversity and abundance of mushrooms, and plant life too, and animal and all of it, insect. It was just a completely different ecology. You could go from one side to literally 10 feet across the road, completely barren. Really, they really are plantations. They are rows of trees, and if you're lucky, you get some sword ferns and bracken ferns.
Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure that we get some key points here. You mentioned the watershed, healthywatershed.org.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's where people could sign up for your newsletter. Perfect.
That's correct.
Yeah. Nancy, please jump right in.
I wanted to add one comment, is that we've recently been wanting the whole issue of alders to come forward, is that these forests, a conifer forest is not a healthy forest. We need a diverse forest with both deciduous and conifers. And a few years back talking to a BLM restoration person. I said, what can we do with Jetty Creek? And she said, just let the alders return. Alders are the first in succession. They hold the soil. They allow the native plants to come in. They'll eventually shade out the invasives. And then also then the conifers will start coming up through them, and eventually they'll shade out the alders. But that is a way of stabilizing these slopes. Alders burn a lot less hot. The leaves are water, not pitch. And so it's important for fire issues. And it's also important as a way of healing the Jetty Creek watershed. It's not a working forest. It needs to be, the work is to produce our drinking water and habitat for the animals.
Right. So for most people who are listening to this, I'm imagining will be pretty familiar with the area, but there might be a few people who aren't familiar with where Jetty Creek is and how it's situated and how the water actually, how small it is and how many people it serves, that kind of thing. Do you want to take that, Anna or Nancy?
Nancy, I think you'd probably be better at answering that.
I can't remember. So Jetty Creek is about 1,240 acres. It sits just north of the city of Rockaway on the east side of 101. It has very steep slopes, and it was originally logged in the 70s, and then quote replanted, and so now they're logging the next cycle. And I think that it's a bowl, it's shaped like a bowl, and so there's about 100 creeks outside the mainstream that flow into the mainstream. So you have these steep slopes with these streams running down, and that's the water. That's where the water is coming from, and it's both surface and groundwater. And so then that we've clear cut straight across and sprayed all of these feeder streams is really stressful on that watershed. And so if we let it just the alder return and heal, then we may have a chance for sequestering water in the future.
Yeah, and I think that for people who maybe don't understand the scale, maybe let's talk a little bit about Oregon Forest Practices Act and how that how all the different levels of administrative bureaucracy that any forester might encounter, and a typical the size of a typical operation in the area, just so that people can kind of compare how small this watershed is versus all of the other plantations throughout the North Coast.
What was it? The figure, this is the figure of how much, so in the Tillamook Clatsop area, what was once the temperate rainforest, which is more capable of sequestering carbon than any other rainforest in the world, has been basically decimated in the last, till today. And this last is like a 20-year cycle of, and so this has been going on since the turn of the century. And so what was once, a healthy forest is now these plantations that stretch for long ways. And Jetty Creek is just one example. Richard, one of the men in our group, has been going up in an airplane and documenting by air our ex-temperate rainforest looks like, and it's huge patchworks with very little fringe around it. The condition of our overall private and state forests are being really logged heavily.
Yeah, so my brain is filled with so many facts and statistics that sometimes they pop one out. So sometimes I misspeak, and I'm sure somebody will correct me. But if I remember, the rules for private forestry versus public forestry are different. But this is a privately owned parcel. That's correct?
Right.
So they have a little bit more leniency in terms of what they can and can't log. And for those who want to maybe orient spatially, the area just south of the Nehalem River is where this creek is located. And if you were to look at an recent aerial map, it's not just Jetty Creek that was logged. It's the entire watershed. So the entire watershed has been logged. And when I say the entire watershed, I'm talking about the entire larger Nehalem River watershed and the Tillamook Bay watershed has been logged multiple times. So the amount of trees, and the reason I emphasize how small Jetty Creek is, because the amount of trees that you get from logging Jetty Creek compared to the rest of every timber operation is next to nothing, versus the ability for those trees to hold the water, the drinking water for the community right around it. So I think sometimes that gets lost because people don't understand, like, oh, well, they're logging everywhere, so why not here too? But really, drinking watersheds are very tiny, and we're not saying set aside the entire Nehalem and Tillamook Bay watershed, but just this small little part where people literally are reliant on it for their very survival. And I'm not going to try to quote you how the value of the trees that come out in terms of like board feet, because that's going to vary with a whole host of factors. But I'm going to bet that it's not a lot when you consider the expenses of actually logging it. So in my mind, it's a pretty easy thing to say, we should just set this aside for drinking water. So why do you feel like industry is so hesitant, to say it politely, to do that?
So I think you're bringing up a really good question. And even 13 years ago, we had there was a woman in our group that these watersheds, drinking watersheds, are only a small piece of the whole overall pie. And she said, why don't we have Bull Run protections, which in 1993 they stopped logging and spraying in Bull Run, which is Portland, Oregon's drinking water source. And so it's nationally known now as one of the models of drinking water protection. I strongly believe that these watersheds, drinking watersheds, should be set aside. And we need to start with the drinking water sources for communities and individuals and set those aside. It's critical that, and it may look rainy down here today, but we've had continuing droughts in the summer. It's really dry. Even the
Many people are saying that their wells are going dry. My own well, having lived there for 15 years, my own well ran dry multiple times in the last couple of summers.
Well, Jetty Creek this last summer, one of my neighbors noticed that one day it didn't even make it to the Nehalem Bay. It was just pooling. And a reminder that Jetty Creek is listed as wild salmon, wild steelhead, and lamprey habitat. And so those fish can't be doing very well if it's becoming so warm and so turbid. And also there's not limited flow.
Yeah, it's an extremely complicated issue. So I'm personally grateful that you're so dedicated. For anybody that made it to the end of the podcast here, I want to give thank you, and a reminder of your website one more time so that they don't have to filter through the middle part too.
It's healthywatershed.org.
Perfect. Is there anything else that you would like to leave the audience with? Some kind of closing thought?
I guess I would just say that we all are human and we all live together in a place, and I think we all really want the same things, which is one in particular, clean and plentiful drinking water and clean air to breathe and a safe place to raise our kids. And I just think that no amount of money can, wish that away, that that thread that runs through us all.
I agree. Nancy, is there anything that you would like to leave our audience with?
Well, I think, sometimes it's really frustrating and feeling like change is so slow, but I think in becoming active at whatever level is hope makes us feel more hopeful. And I think, and to really, really connect with the nature that is still here. And I think and connect with other people as community is so important so that we can all work on this together. And also, I think it's important to speak up and stand up, that if, as long as we don't talk about what's happening, then it's invisible. And I think we really need to make these issues visible. So thank you for having this podcast too.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you both for joining me. Every time I listen to you speak, Nancy, I learn something new. And I absolutely will try to attend the next lecture in the lecture series. That sounds like a good one. So for our audience, thank you so much for participating. This has been the Tillamook County Pioneers Get to Know Your Local Nonprofit podcast. We have a website, Tillamook County Pioneer. If you found this podcast without finding the website first, you're incredible, and I hope to meet you one day. Otherwise, thank you, and tune in for the next one.